Hi, this is Mrs. Boykin, and today we're going to talk about factoring with three terms. Let's take a look at our first problem. We always need to check to see if there is a greatest common factor before we begin any factoring problem. Taking a look at our three numbers, I find that there is no number that I can divide each of my terms by. However, there is a variable, and that would be x. So once you factor out the x, we were going to write down what remains. And we get 3x squared minus 7x minus 10. At this point, we're going to do what we call the field goal method, which is where I'm going to multiply my first term. And if we talk about in terms as term A, term B, and term C, I'm going to multiply my A term times my C term. In other words, the 3 times the negative 10, and I'm going to get a negative 30 and put it at the top of my x. My B term, to include the sign, is negative 7, and that goes at the bottom of my x. Now, taking a look at what are the factors of 30. I can multiply 1 times 30, 2 times 15, 3 times 10, and 5 times 6. Those are all the possible combinations. Well, if I'm going to multiply and get a negative 30, that means one of my columns has to be negative, the other positive. Since the sum is going to be a negative 7, that means all my larger numbers need to be the negative, because when I add, I need to have a negative result. So in looking at my choices, I can see that by adding 3 and a negative 10, I'll get the negative 7. So I'm going to place that in my x. And you don't have to use the x. Some of you that are familiar with factoring or are good at factoring, if you want to, after you get going and you're used to it, if you want to eliminate the x, it's just to kind of get your mind oriented around what you're trying to accomplish. So let's continue. My greatest common factor, x, that got factored out, comes down. And I'm going to bring down my first term, my 3x squared, my A term. I'm going to bring down my last term, that negative 10, and then I'm going to put down what I broke apart. I'm breaking apart essentially my B term into two parts. My positive 3, and don't forget the variable x. My next is negative 10x, because a positive 3x and negative 10x adds up to my B term, negative 7x. At this point, this is when I start the grouping process. We have 4 terms, and we can group the first 2 and the last 2. Don't forget to include the sign. And we can ask ourselves, what can I divide my first binomial by? I can not only divide by 3, but also an x. And when I divide, remains x plus 1. Let's take a look at the second binomial. Now, when we have this a negative, we want to divide by a negative, and we can divide both sides by a negative 10. So we factor out the negative 10, and when we divide, what remains is negative 10 divided by negative 10 is a positive x, negative by negative is a positive 1. And what's in green should match. So let's bring it all together for our final answer. We can't forget the greatest common factor that was part of our very first step. A lot of people forget that, and that's how they end up missing problems when it comes to a test or the SOL. My next binomial would be what's here in purple, my 3x and my negative 10, bringing that together. And then lastly, the green that I shared in common, x plus 1. And there you have your final answer. If we multiply these two binomials together and then multiply by x, we'll end up with our original problem. So make sure you check your answers. Also, if there is just one variable involved in your problem, you can check it graphically. So let's see how we can do that. I'm at my graphing application, and I'm going to type in my original problem, which was 3x to the third power minus 7x squared oh, let me back this up. I wasn't paying attention. Minus 7x squared minus 10x. And if I hit enter, there's the graph of my original problem. Hitting tab, I bring up another equation line. Let's now type in what we got for our answer. When we factored, we ended up with x times 3x minus 10, close it, open my last, x plus 1, close it. So here is my factored answer. When I hit enter, oh, there we go. I think it graphed it. It's not liking something. What did I do? Let's try again. X times, parentheses, 3x minus 10 times x plus 1. Hit enter, and there we go. We can see that the two graphs are now on top of each other, and they clearly match, as they should, because those are equivalent. One is just in polynomial form, one is in factored form. Here we have our second problem, and we're taking a look at all terms and deciding what we can factor each by. Each of them can be divided by 5. M does not appear in all three terms, and neither does N, so we can only start by factoring out the 5. When I divide, I have 9m squared minus 59mn plus 30n squared. So here we are. Can't factor any numbers out, can't factor any variables out, so we're going to start our field goal method, which tells us to multiply the first and the last terms. So 9 times a positive 30 leaves me with 270, and my center term, the negative 59, my B term, comes down. So we need to figure out what two numbers are going to multiply together to give me 270, and when I add them up, they're going to equal negative 59. Well, I don't know about you, but I really don't feel like listing all the factors of 270, so let's look at the calculator for some assistance. If I go to my graphing app, I can type in there my A times C, which we said equaled 270. If we divide this by x, and think about dividing by x because we made that x pattern, hit enter. We don't see a graph, but we're not really looking for the graph. We want to hit Control T for table, and we want to look at the table of values. I'm looking here, and I need to find something that's going to add to a negative 59. Obviously, two positives are not going to add up to a negative, so we're going to go scroll backwards in the chart, looking for two terms that are going to add up to a negative 59, and I think I've discovered those, negative 5 and negative 54. So going back to our problem, let's put in there the negative 5 and the negative 54. They multiply and give me a positive 270, and they add up to a negative 59. So basically what I did is I broke down my B term to a negative 5. Don't forget your variables. Mn. They never went away, we're just focused on the numbers. And we bring down the last term, positive 30 n squared, and we bring down our first term, 9m squared, And don't forget the greatest common factor from step 1. Instead of rewriting it every step of the way, I like to bring the arrow down, just put them in my answer blank. That way I don't have to worry about them. All right, so if we group the first two terms and our last two terms, we now have factoring with 4 terms. So what can we divide the first two terms by? There's no number, but I can see I can divide both of those by m. And I get 9. Oh, meant to change my color. Dividing both by m, the result is 9m minus, that cancels out, 5n. Let's take a look at what we can divide these two by. Now, being that this is a negative 54mn, I'm going to divide by a negative number. And I think I want to divide both of these by a negative 6. And I see n is in common as well. So I'm going to divide by that negative 6n. And when I divide, the result is negative divided by negative is a positive 9. The n's cancel, m. And over here we have a positive divided by a negative. That's a negative. 30 divided by 6 is 5. And n squared divided by n is n. Now we're ready to put it together. So my m and my negative 6n come down and form my next binomial. And my last binomial, 9m minus 5n. And there we have our fully factored answer to include our greatest common factor from step 1. We didn't forget it, and there we go. All right, let's take a look at our third and last problem. Here we are at our third problem, maybe a little more complicated than the previous. Let's see what we can factor out, because that's where we always need to start. Looking at my numbers, I decided that I can factor out a 6y. If you're looking at the numbers and you're a little concerned about what can you divide by, let me show you another trick in the calculator. If I go to my calculator app, I can type in GCD, greatest common divisor, and I can put the first two numbers of my problem. 54, put a comma, and 294. I'm not concerned about the sign because I'm just looking for the number itself. Hit enter. I see the greatest common factor between these two numbers is 6. I take my result and type it again. The result is 6. And I put my last number in there, which is 120. And I find out my greatest common factor between these two numbers. The result of my first and my third number is also 6. So I feel really confident that we got the greatest common factor. Dividing by the 6y, let's see what we have left. That leaves me with 9x squared, because the y's are canceling, minus 49, negative 294 divided by 6 is negative 49, xy, and 120 divided by 6, that's positive 20, y to the third divided by y is y squared. So here we go with our field goal method. 9 times positive 20 is a positive 180. My middle term is a negative 49. So we're trying to figure out the numbers. Then when we multiply them, we get 180, and when we add them together, we get negative 49. Now, we can go back into the calculator, and we can take a look at that. go to my graphing app, and I'm putting in there 180 divided by x. Hit enter. Control T will show me the table of values, and here's all my choices. I'm looking for what's going to add up to a negative 49. So let's go back to my negatives. And here we are, negative 4 and negative 45. Those two are going to add up to what we need, that negative 49. Negative 4 and a negative 45. So my first term, 9x squared, is going to come down. My center term is breaking out into two parts. Now, if you like, you can certainly switch these around. If you want to put the negative 45 first, because you're looking at the 9 thinking how nicely they could factor. And then the negative 4xy plus 20y squared. So what I'm saying is these two terms in the middle, your negative 4 and your negative 45, you can flip them around if you think it's easier to work with that way, or you can leave it as is. So let's go ahead and group the first two and the last two. My greatest common factor from my first step, don't forget, he's going to come down here and he's going to be all set up ready for me to finish off my problem. Let's go ahead and divide the first two terms. 9x squared and negative 45. Both of those are divisible by 9 and an x. The 9x is factored out, as they say, and when I divide, I get the 9's cancel, and the x squared divided by x is x. Negative 45 divided by 9 is a negative 5, and my x's are canceling, and I bring down my y. Let's take a look at the second binomial. Being this is a negative, I need to divide by a negative, and I can divide both by negative 4 as well as a y. I'm factoring out the negative 4y, and when I divide, let's see what remains. Negative and negative make a positive. My 4's are canceling. My y's are canceling, leaving me with the x. Positive 20 divided by negative 4, well, that's a negative 5. Y squared divided by y is y. And let's finish it up. What I factored out in blue, put those together. Those become my first binomial, 9x minus 4y. What's in red, and you know that you did your problem correctly when the two of those match, x minus 5y. And there you have your complete factored answer. This one we're not able to check in the graphing calculator by graphing each of them to see if they're equivalent because we have two variables, both an x and a y. But you certainly can multiply your two binomials together using the box method or FOIL, taking that result and multiply it by 6y to get your original problem. Well, there you go, factoring with 3 terms, 3 problems for you to look over. And if you still are having trouble, please stop by Cav Morning. Your math teacher would be glad to help you. Thanks, guys.